The Garre people were ruled and occupied by ruthless and inhuman monarchs and dictator of Ethiopia. Menelik subjected the Garre people to painful political and economical repression. Haile Selassie carried out the tortured massacre and ordered his military to wipe out the entire Garre people from Ethiopia. Beginning from October 1964 through December 1964, they rounded up the Garre people from Arero, Magda, Malka Olu through Malkamari on the Dawa river bank, and from Wachol, Lehi through Chilako, and were put in concentration camp at Dedetu and Lehi. Over 85% of the Garre people living in Ethiopia were wiped out. A collaborative resistance from the Garre people and many other ethnic groups succeeded in toppling the Haile Selassie in 1974. The Garre people, who helped to overthrow the Menelik, were denied the right of self-rule and regional autonomy. A military dictator who was the worst and crueler than the Menelik administration ruled the country and committed genocide against the Garre people. Between 1958 and 1966, the Haile Selassie government slaughtered 600,000 Garre civilians. The Garre leaders and elders, including the Garre Supreme Great Leader Sultan Robo Haji Hossein Gababa, were slaughtered. The entire population of Wachol town were cleansed and the city was destroyed. Also, between 1974 and 1991, the dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam's government murdered 8,000 Garre civilians. The Garre land was taken away and Garre people were subjected to untold and undocumented hate crimes which were committed by various factions in Ethiopia. The dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam portrayed the Garre people as foreign terrorists and authorized animosity and terrorist acts either openly or covertly against the Garre people. In the city of Wachil's, homes and mosques were raided by the dictator's military junta and Garre males were murdered execution style. In one instance, 60 men between 16 and 32 were tied up together and executed in cold blood. Each one of the men was shot at least 25 times. Miraculously, one man survived after being shot 28 times. Many other Garre men were killed by hanging and their bodies were displayed in the main city square for several days. People were forced out of their houses to go and watch the deceased tortured bodies. In 1968, one Garre man was accused of planting landmines and other terrorist acts against the Ethiopian government. He was tied up on the military jeep back bumper and driven around the city blocks and tortured to death. His flesh was displayed on designated areas on the main street for several days before the family could pick the body up and bury him. During both administrations, Haile Selassie and Mengistu Haile Mariam, the Garre people were hunted under the label of Muslim extremist and Somali terrorist. Again, in 1991-92, various opposition groups from different ethnic backgrounds, including the Garre people, managed to overthrow the dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam's government. Still, the Garre people have been denied the opportunity to participate in the newly established transitional government of Ethiopia. Instead, the OLF, Oromo Liberation Front, representing the largest ethnic group and holding majority in parliamentary seats, made it impossible for the Garre people to have their regional autonomy. The OLF claimed the Garre region as a part of their territory. The OLF waged a campaign against the Garre people, stating that the Garre people are Somalian, therefore, they have no right to claim any region in so-called Ethiopia. They viewed the Garre people as foreigners and occupying forces in the Oromo land. History proves that the Garre people never claimed themselves as Ethiopian, nor did they accept any Ethiopian administration prior to current government. The Garre have been fighting against Abyssinian colonialists since 1889, when Menelik invaded the Garre kingdom in the 1800s with the help of Germany and British. Since the European settlers came to East Africa, particularly British, Italian and the French, the Garre people were divided into three parts. British occupied the Garre lands on the southwest, the Italians occupied the east, and the Ethiopian occupied in the northwest. The Garre land was named after the Barana clan because the Barana clan were pagans who were believed to be easily converted to Christianity. They were non-militant and they are amongst the group of nomads that did not participate in a campaign against the black imperialist Ethiopia. In contrast, both the British and the Ethiopia imperialists viewed the Garre people as always unruly and troublesome tribe. In 1895, the Garre were defeated by the British and the Ethiopian Empire. Mr. Ali Abdi, the Garre's leader, went to the Italian frontier in Somaliland and asked for military assistance. In return, the Garre would grant the Italian government the right of passage into Ethiopia. Italy agreed and gave military equipment to the Garre, and the Ethiopian army was defeated. The Garre gained control of its region. In 1913, the Ethiopia and British made a joint military campaign against the Garre people and invaded the Garre land. They committed genocide against the Garre people. Therefore, the Garre people endured a heartbreaking situation due to centuries of colonialization by the British and Ethiopian. The British occupied the Garre country for 61 years. During that 61 years of occupation, the British government practically robbed the Garre of their livestock and destroyed wild animals such as rhino, elephants, buffalo, and tigers. The British and Ethiopian imperialists collected cattle as form of tribute and taxes. In some cases they raided the Garre villages and looted their huts. They justified the raid by stating that they are enforcing the law to collect taxes from those Garre gangs who defied the law. The British also helped the Ethiopians to occupy the Garre country in order to stop the Garre people from moving and keeping their resources to far northern Garre, what is known today as the southern Ethiopia. The Garre leaders were captured and many others were murdered. Gababa Mahad, his son Hossein Gababa, and Ali Obdi were amongst the leaders that were captured by British occupying forces. Gababa Mahad was arrested in Nairobi for 10 years. He was tortured in prison and later released. However, he died later from trauma and head injury. His son Haj Hossein Gababa also was captured and kept under house arrest in Marsabit. The British occupying forces considered him as militant, unruly, and anti-British colonialist. Therefore, he was detained under British Military Defense Regulation of 1939 section number 23 and 24. He was kept in Marsabit from December 1942 to 1950. He later escaped to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and declared war against British colonial forces, but he was later killed by Emperor Haile Selassie in 19